So good morning. So welcome to our union session this morning on moving the needle together, valuing non-traditional approaches to faculty tenure promotion and advancement. My name is Pranoti Asher. I'm a staff member at the American Geophysical Union. I manage the higher education programs. And here we have Lexi Schultz, who is the VP of Public Affairs at AGU. Our third co-convener, Christopher Keene from the American Geosciences Institute, unfortunately is not here because he's having knee surgery this morning. So our apologies for that. But we're really grateful that you are all able to come to this session to start the conversation about issues of tenure and promotion that are very important to all of us who work in the academy. So we wanted to just take a few minutes to open the topic. And before I do that, I just want to remind everyone that since this session is being recorded, it's really important that if you ask a question, you want to make a comment, that you go up to the microphone to speak. And if you're a speaker, you speak into the microphone, and we'll let you know if you can't be heard clearly. So we'll ask you to move closer to the microphone. Do you want to say a few words?
I know it's early, and I'm really glad that our speakers are all here, and I'm really glad we're starting the conversation about this topic. So this is something that is near and dear to a bunch of our hearts, because there is so much good work that scientists do that is beyond the typical good work of publishing and teaching and the normal academic part of science, but that's not being rewarded. And because it's not being rewarded, it's actually being discouraged. So we need to move the needle, hence the name of the session today, beyond that. And this is just going to be the start of a conversation. Pranoti and I were looking, and this was the first session on this topic that we could find at fall meeting. So our hope is that this becomes a much more regular discussion, and that you all will be, sort of the instigators of that discussion. So thank you so much for joining us, and we really, really look forward to more conversations.
Each of the talks are 12 minutes, just because we wanted to have ample time for discussion and conversation and Q&A at the end. So your little box here does say 12 minutes, and when we hit the start, I think at 10 minutes, I think it'll start flashing orange, and then we have a magical hook that will take you off the stage. So if you finish early, you're welcome to say you can have a Q&A, but if we're getting very close to the end of the time, we'll just save that for later. Unfortunately, our second speaker is not here today. He lives in Southern Maryland, and his driveway was a sheet of ice, and so he was not able to leave at 4:30 this morning. So he sends his regrets, and so we do have a little bit of time in the second talk period to start having conversations. If we should do that. Yeah. Okay. So just to stay on time, we are right on time now. Okay. No. Yeah, go ahead. Can I multitask? Our first speaker today is going to be talking about the role of professional societies in moving the needle, and our speaker is Vicki McConnell, who is the executive director of the Geological Society of America, and her co-authors are Kim Hanula and Catherine White.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for rousing yourself this morning and coming out to one of the very first sessions and the very first presentation. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate being invited to discuss a little bit some resources that you might not be completely aware of that's out there, and that this is simply a conversation to make you aware of that and describe those resources in a little more detail. Now, I'm featuring our work at GSA because that's the work I'm most familiar with, but I want to say that there are other professional societies that coordinate work in this space, and I'm sure have similar resources as well. And if you're part of those societies, you should think about having that conversation with them as well. So with that, here we go. So professional societies. So first and foremost, professional societies such as GSA and AGU, and I guess I want to stop right there, and I want to thank AGU and I want to thank AGI for proposing this session and getting us all together to have the conversations. As I was saying, these professional societies like GSA and AGU, we exist primarily, really only, to support our members' careers and professions. So societies reflect the interest and priorities of its members, and by that also of your profession writ large, and in our case that's the geosciences. So we develop resources and our programs and work to assist the members, of course. We also work really hard to provide positive direction for the geoscience professional culture, both within academia and in non-academic institutions. This covers many policy and philosophical directions, and certainly includes participating in the conversations about how our higher learning institutes are supporting their professors and their instructors. I would say for a variety of reasons, the time right now is crucial to really dig in deeply to this discussion of how academic professional careers are built, supported, and measured by their institutions. So again, while the societies are geared toward members, we really do reflect the broader profession writ large. So at GSA, we have a variety of resources, and we have several ways that members can serve the society and thus serve the larger community. Usually that's by inviting members' involvement in specialty groups and organizational leadership. And I'm going to just bring your attention to a couple of those quickly, but I'm not going to go into those in detail today. We host a Geo-Education Division with its mission to further the geoscience education, pedagogy, research, and structure and learning and teaching at all levels. GSA leadership has developed several society committees to assist them in developing policy and the programs that address geoscience educational issues. And that includes advocating for diversity and inclusion in the geoscience community. What I'm going to spend the rest of my chat up here with you is really describing our policy position papers, and particularly ones that are relevant to this discussion of a cultural shift of how higher learning institutes are framing or not framing the valuing of non-traditional approaches to faculty tenure, promotion, and advancement. So this is a screenshot of one of our pages. And what I bring your attention to, if you see the green up there on the top, which is, this is under science policy. We have crafted a series of policy position statements over the last several decades that cover scientific, educational, professional, and societal issues that geoscientists and the geosciences both intersect and impact. I invite you to go to the website and review them. They're listed under science policy, and they're available to view and download by any interested party. This is not behind a membership wall. In particular, for this discussion, I've highlighted with little arrows there under professional issues and educational issues a number of these types of position papers. And I'm not going to go over every single one of these, but just, expanding and improving geoscience in higher ed, importance of teaching earth science, diversity in the geosciences, etc. I'm going to focus on 2 or 3 of these in particular. But before I do that, I want to spend a little time describing how these policy position papers are crafted and what they really represent, because they have the weight of the society, plus they have the weight of the geoscience community represented. A concept for a paper is brought forward, can come from anyone, can come from a member, can come from a committee, but it goes before our Geoscience and Public Policy Committee. That committee has representatives that broadly represent the GSA community. They review the policy concept, and if they find that it's an issue that's both relevant and sound, then they will recommend to council that that policy statement be crafted. There's a group put together then, a subcommittee, that can both be GSA and non-GSA members. Really, we're looking at that subject matter experts that we bring forward to craft the policy statement, do the research, make the argument, and they put together the preliminary draft, which is then sent out to all GSA members for comment. And generally, that takes a couple of months of comment period. Once all those comments are compiled, the final draft is put together and it's put before council, at which point council reviews and generally approves. They may make a few tweaks, they may ask some questions why, but it's by that point it is to the approval. So the point I'm making here is these policy position statements are not top-down, something that leadership and their thoughtfulness have decided is important. They're really grassroots. They're really coming from the community. They're reflecting the issues of the community. And thus, when you use them, you can clearly say that this is what 26,000 plus people have as their consensus statement. So I'm going to bring your attention to 3 position papers. I'm going to discuss the implications of promoting earth science literacy and rewarding professional contributions in the public sphere. We recently approved a 3rd paper, the one you see in the middle there, removing barriers to career progression for women in the geosciences. And that certainly has some implications and relevance to this conversation. And I invite you to download, go ahead and view and download that, but I'm not going to go into it in detail at this particular one. All of our position statements start by stating the position and purpose for the policy statement. You can see that up there. This is followed by a rationale of the position, basically that argument for, against, or what our recommendations are, as related particularly to geoscientists, and specific recommendations that geoscientists and others can act upon. Again, I'm not going to go through all of that today, but I encourage you to visit our website and review those policy statements. What I want to bring to your attention are the recommendations of 2 of the position papers. First, let's review the recommendations in the rewarding professional contributions in public spheres. In this case, the recommendations are divided into what the professional can do and what the professional supervisors and peers can do. For the professional, the recommendations encourage scholarly and service activities in public policy and policy development, as well as involving themselves in advancing geoscience education and curricular reform. The paper directs one to policy development related to earth sciences and processes, but I think we all recognize that the dimensional breadth of the word earth sciences includes everything from atmospheric to planetary. As important in general, and possibly more important for this discussion, are the recommendations listed for those leadership roles at institutions and universities, to broaden the scope of what activities inside and outside of an institution should be recognized and rewarded throughout a scholar's professional career. In other words, the publish or perish tenet for success should be enhanced by the many other ways of communicating good science, impacting our society, and effecting decisions about the world that will resonate for centuries to come. In the case of the Promoting Earth Science Literacy for Public Decision, making geoscientists are encouraged to consider their work in the context of addressing societal issues, including applied sciences, to work to improve the perception of geoscience and the general understanding of its relevance, as well to get involved in communicating all of this via the multitude of avenues available beyond the traditional classroom setting. Employers and educators are again encouraged to support geoscience and outreach by their employees by allowing them the space, the time, and the recognition of the importance of these efforts, including during performance review and awards. Both these papers carry thoughtful and impactful reasoning and actions. So in summary, I just say that GSA, whoa, baby, okay. I'll just say you can read what's up there, yeah. I'll summarize by saying, again, these position statements, they've been around for a while, they're very thoughtful, they have great recommendations, they carry the weight of the geoscience community, and they're open for everyone to use. Thank you.
And actually, why don't you stay, Vicki? Because, so just as a reminder, our second speaker was unable to be here today.
I didn't mean to take any of his time.
But what it means is we have some time during the slot for questions for Vicki and also for any discussion. So I'm just going to start maybe by saying, are there any questions for Vicki?
Yipes.
Hi, Vicki. Laurie Leshin from WPI. So one of the things I'm interested in, we as universities are doing the things we can to change the criteria to honor a broader scope of work. Are professional societies looking at changing the criteria for some of their awards and their honors, which are so important to our faculty in their advancement, to also be more inclusive of this kind of work? Because I think a lot of folks feel like they kind of run into a brick wall with the same types of folks continuing to be rewarded, and those folks not, the work of those folks and those folks themselves not always reflecting the great diversity that exists in geoscience. Well, I shouldn't call it great diversity, some of the diversity that exists in geoscience.
That's a great question, and yes, if you look at most of the geosciences, their medal awards, the medalists, it is about a lifetime achievement in research and science. And so we've had those conversations. I don't see the medals changing as much, but we do have specific awards, and I think all organizations and societies should think about that recognize that. We also, for the ability to be nominated to fellowship at GSA, it can be service to the society, and it can be in policy and policy advancement and communication, not only how many cited professional papers you have. But it needs more, I agree, and I think that's a very fair question, and I hope we can do something with that. Thank you. Thanks for that. Oh, sorry.
I'm Mike Friedman from the American Meteorological Society, and I'm curious if you've had similar sessions like this at your meetings, and what other sort of panels and forums have you done for GSA?
Yeah. I don't know that I honestly don't think I have. I'm looking at Pronodi and Lexi.
I searched 10 years of
Okay.
abstracts.
That was specific to this issue. We certainly have had a variety, and we generally always have sessions on diversity and inclusion, and we had a very big session on the removing barriers to women in the geoscience profession. That said, I think there'll be a session proposed for next year, because we'd like to keep this conversation going. So I can see that being continued. I will say that when these two particular policy papers that I mentioned were introduced, particularly the one that came out in 2001, we did send a mass mailing to all university geoscience deans introducing the policy. And I was thinking about that as I was putting this together, and realizing that you can't do it one time and pat yourself on the back, of course. So we need to work that into a more regular schedule, because it's not just the conversation, and I'm sure there are department chairs and perhaps even deans out here today as well, is that we have to have a robust discussion and debate about this. So it has to come from both sides, and that is another way that we can help to advocate and be a resource. Same with AMS too. Yeah, you'll need to use the.
Kim Cobb, Georgia Tech. And I was just wondering if you could speak to how you're going to translate or foster the adoption of some of these recommendations into the leadership for universities. Are you monitoring their wholesale adoption by certain universities? Is there a possibility to lift those folks up? Mm-hmm. Do you have an operational plan?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I would say kinda. But I really feel that we've used this right now as we haven't been pushing it. You know, it's more a pull that I make you aware of it. Our policy statements are, I checked the Google statistics or the analytics on this, which didn't go back as far as I'd like to, but they get thousands of hits a year. These get less than that, a few hundred, couple of them only a dozen, because they've only been around for a while. So there's obviously plenty of space for us to put a little bit more effort into helping everyone know that these resources are there, and working on operational plans. So thanks for that question, absolutely. So, yeah. So are you going to be able to show his slides? You're not going to show his slides? Do you think that's not? Yes.
Are you aware that Eric is here that can speak to you?
Oh, hi, John.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
do you want any slides?
Yes, I'll try the slides. It's going to be fun.
Do you want me to say something? You want to introduce him while I get the slides up?
You came up the wrong way, Erin.
That's all right.
So,
I need to use I need to use this too.
so here's where we do the Adlib part of the thing. So now we're going to have Eric Davidson, who's going to stand in for David Secor, the current president of AGU, which is a nice honor for all of us.
So this is going to be a very interesting experiment. It's kind of a case of what goes around comes around. When I saw this this session on the program, I thought, oh wow, I'm really proud of what the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science is doing. I'm going to recruit one of my colleagues to participate in this, which I successfully did. And then I got an email this morning that the ice storm has prevented David Secor, who is the president of our faculty senate, from being able to get here. I guess he lives on a hill and there's just an ice sheet and it wouldn't be safe for him to come. I have never seen this slide deck before. So this is the blind leading the blind, although I am familiar with what our university is doing on this. In fact, I'm involved in enforcing part of it as the director of one of our laboratory units that I do the annual reviews of the faculty and also am involved in all the promotion and tenure. So this will be really interesting to see how this is going to go. I haven't seen these any sooner than you have. Pardon me? Oh, well, okay, so I don't have any idea how many slides I have, so we'll just go. As you can see, we are distributed across several different branches in this university, this distributed university of laboratories. Is based on a publication in 1990 regarding recommendations for class of academic achievement. So we now have, as part of our evaluation, these 4 criteria: discovery, integration, application, and teaching. Not that every faculty member has to excel in every one, but every one counts towards their evaluation, promotion, and tenure. We hope that every one of them participates in each of these, at least to some degree, depending on his or her strengths. This is a very complex slide, and I have no idea what it's supposed to say. Probably looking at where we fit in the realm of other activities going on in other universities, and you probably know more about this than I do. Okay. So you could imagine that we have these categories of discovery, integration, application, and teaching, and there are lots of different ways that people can be involved in them. And so as we put, this was a sort of a survey of looking at these and to see if we have consistency in our ability to understand them and how we would go about evaluating them. And you can see that that study that was done by our faculty senate identified some of them that are fairly easy to understand, like up at the very top is peer-reviewed publication, but some of those blue-colored ones are the ones that are more difficult to find metrics and end up being more subjective in analysis, I believe is the gist of this. So apparently there was being good scientists, taking what data we had, we used a PCA ordination to kind of look through those things for and seeing how the various metrics that we had did align with integration, discovery, application, teaching. I confess that I don't do this. This is more of a study that was done by the faculty senate, but this has not been operationalized, although I imagine it could be, for annual evaluation of faculty. This is an overview of acceptance of efforts that have been done at different universities as to whether the feel that the criteria that are being used are specific or very specific. And ours, University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science, comes out there as rather generic. So there are other examples that are more specific or more generic. So I think our faculty has embrace this. There are still things to work out for sure, and we at faculty meetings, as is interminably happens at faculty meetings, we talk about this a lot, but I think that's a really good sign. And I think I see them getting really nervous, so I think I'm just going to quit there, and I'll try to participate in your questions. Thank you.
Wow, I think Eric gets the prize. I think I heard Laurie sing. This was like that dream that we all have. Yeah. And I have the honor of introducing our next speaker, Laurie Leshin from the Worcester Polytechnic Institute.
Bravo, Eric. I have actually had to do this too, believe it or not. I once gave a talk for a colleague who got stuck for a conference, and I described it this way, of that dream, that recurring dream of having to take the final in the course that you've never attended. But it's wonderful because you could put up a slide and go, oh no, I don't buy that. I don't believe in that. That's wrong. That's clearly it's critiquing, and yeah. Okay, good. Ooh. Oh my goodness. Wait. It's,
Stop it.
Wait, I get my full 12 minutes, right? All right. Well, hi everybody. Thank you, and thanks to Pranoti and Lexi for organizing this session. And Pranoti maybe will tell later the story of how the session actually came to be based on an Academies session that we were both at, where I started talking about this topic, and I'm so happy that you actually just jumped up and gave the talk before mine, because I thought, oh great, the talk before mine is going to talk all about Boyer and set up these promotion criteria, so I don't have to spend a ton of time on that. So I'm glad we at least got them out there and got them introduced. So my name is Laurie Leshen, and I am the president of a wonderful technological university in Worcester, Massachusetts, Worcester Polytechnic Institute. Everybody say it with me. It's pronounced Worcester. Worcester, if you're local. If you're a good local, it's Worcester. That's right, that's right. And so WPI is one of the oldest technological universities in the US, kind of your classic New England campus on a hill. If you're sitting there saying, why don't I know about this place? It's because we have no geology department. We really don't have any earth science. And so we do some sustainability work, we do environmental engineering, but we don't typically have people that hang out at AGU, but I am a lifelong AGU person, and I'm thrilled to be here. And my co-author, Peter Hansen, is actually a historian at WPI who studies the history of mountains and mountaineers. Thank you. And how they fit into societal norms and things, and a fascinating guy. So, but he was also the lead faculty member who drove our process of actually updating our promotion criteria at WPI recently to honor the breadth of scholarly work. And so since most of you don't really know us, I'm just gonna take a minute and talk about, sort of frame up some things about WPI that kind of caused us to make this change in our promotion criteria, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about what we did. So WPI is a technological university. Like 98% of the students, the 5,000 undergrads and 2,000 grad students at WPI graduate with a STEM degree. Engineering, computer science, life sciences, bioengineering, mechanical engineering, all the usual stuff. But as I said, we do not have an earth science department. Robotics engineering, we were the first university in the country to offer an undergraduate a fully interdisciplinary undergraduate degree in robotics engineering. Some of you have heard of Robert Goddard, the father of modern rocketry. That's why I have a WPI rocket pin on. He is a graduate of WPI, and I have patched roofs in some of my ancient buildings to prove it, based on some of his early experiments on our campus with rocket propulsion. So since it was founded over 150 years ago, WPI has been focused on this idea of theory and practice together, working very closely with industry or with the real world to bring the ideas of science and technology to real communities. And in the last several decades, that approach has manifested itself in a very unique curriculum that is almost entirely project-based. So over 70% of our courses have very major projects associated with them, plus 100% of our students have to do multiple major projects to graduate that are independent projects, typically done in groups. There's a few different flavors of them, and they have to do more than one. So they do a senior capstone project like a lot of engineering schools, but we do it across engineering sciences and our business school and any humanities majors that we might have as well. So the students here on the right are doing a capstone project in civil engineering. They're working at the expansion of the Panama Canal in Panama. The biggest engineering project on the planet until it opened a couple of years ago. So very exciting for them to be hands-on working out there in the real field. But probably the most interesting project that we do is a project that's typically done in the junior year, where students work in interdisciplinary teams of 4, usually, in a real community somewhere around the world with a real-world sponsor in a faculty-curated way. So students and faculty travel together to these locations and work on problems that sit at the intersection of technology and society. And so the students on the left are actually working in Thailand at a salt farm to help the local community sustain a centuries-long practice in salt farming and yet bring it to the modern era as well. So again, there's a technical and scientific aspect to the problem, but it's also a community challenge for this local community. And so we are the geeks for sure, but we are geeks who are very focused on making real impact in the world. And just quickly so that you can see, so we have these 50 or so project centers all over the world on 6 continents. And we'll send, typically this year, we'll send about 1,000 students to these 50 communities in groups of 24, so 6 groups of 4, plus 2 faculty members travel with them for an entire term. And for us, that's a 7-week term. So we threw out our entire academic calendar so that the students could focus time and energy on these projects for a whole term. So we don't have semesters, we have 7-week terms. So the students go and do this. They do a preparation course ahead of time. They go, they do their projects for, again, a real world sponsor like an NGO or a municipality or a company. One of the things that we've done since I arrived at WPI 4.5 years ago is we're really trying to increase the numbers of students who have that ability to do their project off campus. 100% of them have to do the projects to graduate, but having the experience off campus, we have discovered through some survey research, is extraordinarily impactful for the long term for our graduates. And so we wanted to lower the barriers. So one of the things we've done now is that every single student in the incoming class gets a $5,000 global scholarship to defray the cost of going off campus to do that. And of course, this has been recognized and blah, blah, blah. I won't talk too much about those honors, but it's a wonderful program. And it's a program that stretches our faculty as well, you can imagine. So the 2 faculty that go with students to work in London or work in Namibia or work in New Zealand, one could be from mechanical engineering and one could be from social science and policy studies, or one could be from the School of Business and the other from chemistry. And they are working on problems that are not in their field of expertise, but over time they develop expertise of working in these local communities. And it's a fabulous set of skills, but it's a set of skills that really draw both on the teaching elements of a faculty member's job and also their research capabilities. Oops, wrong one, sorry, this one. And one other thing, we also do a lot of research at WPI, and we were just recently recognized by the Wall Street Journal as the #1 university in the country. I have no idea how they figured this out, but okay, we'll take it, in integrating research and teaching. And that's exactly really what this project-based learning work tends to do. It tends to dissolve the barriers between scholarship and teaching, right? So it's very interesting. And I won't spend the time right now talking about some of our very cool research, like growing heart cells on using spinach leaves as scaffold. But I'll tell you, if you go in the Bill Nye Saves the World this latest season on Netflix, it's the very first story in there about how we're growing beating heart tissue on spinach leaves. And they literally thought of it while eating spinach salad for lunch. So, you know, who knows? Okay. So the first day I started at WPI, the day I arrived, there was something on my chair when I walked into the office, literally my first day on the job as president. And it was the results of the COACH survey, which is a faculty satisfaction survey that the Harvard Graduate School of Education does at institution. And it showed we were doing great in most ways, but one of the highest levels of dissatisfaction was with the promotion process to full professor. And among women, there was absolutely no one who thought it was a good process. Gee, what a shock, right? So there was clearly a problem here. And so like all universities, we got right to work, and 4 years later, we changed our criteria. So it took a little while, but, oh yeah, right, speedy, right? But so faculty-driven committees and task forces worked on the update of the criteria, and in the end, they came to a very similar place to where University of Maryland did, which is using the criteria of Boyer to drive what qualifies as scholarship at WPI. So we think about these things as we still require that you do scholarship with an demonstrated external impact beyond WPI, but we think about the way that scholarship comes about and the kind of scholarship that can be as being much broader than the traditional peer-reviewed papers, and the way the dissemination happens and the way the impact is generated and substantiated can be much broader. So we were looking at this scholarship of discovery, scholarship of integration, of application and practice, teaching and learning, and scholarship of engagement are all possible paths now to have scholarship that results in advancement to full professor. And I note that the importance of high quality teaching and high quality scholarship, which has always been a part of our criteria, is still part of the criteria. But the scholarship definition is what has been broadened, what qualifies as high quality scholarship. And the key to me is that the scholarship still must be disseminated in some way, and it must be evaluatable in some way, right? So, as we now are in the process of implementing this, we're just starting to implement this. This is actually the first full year, and I went and I met with our committee that's working this and got some early reactions from them, which I'll tell you about in a second. But I just wanted to give one example of what kind of scholarship might now be more directly considered that before would not have been considered sufficient for promotion at WPI. So we're really passionate, if you haven't figured that out, about this project-based learning stuff. We think, you know, we have these projects all over the world, but also in almost every class at WPI, people are learning through hands-on work. And because we're so passionate about this, we see the impact it has on our students and on real communities around the world. And employers love it, by the way. They all want to hire all our students, and that's great. We started something called the Center for Project-Based Learning, where we're bringing in teams of faculty and administrators from other universities. In the last 4 years, we've worked with 100 other universities to help we've been doing this for 50 years at WPI, where we're helping to share the practice with others. And in that way, we are disseminating decades of work around a teaching and learning practice that's highly impactful. And it's interesting because it's not just getting up and talking about it, although that's part of it. It's developing case studies. The woman on the right here has a book coming out in January on project-based learning in freshman courses. So how to get students working on real-world projects when they're 18 years old and they first walk in the door in ways that are really impactful. And she developed our freshman year courses at WPI called the Great Problem Seminars. Heal the world, feed the world, power the world, things like this. Again, where interdisciplinary groups of faculty come together and get students working on projects right when they walk in the door. And so again, now she's a chemistry professor, by the way, and now she's got this book coming out on great practices in teaching and learning that's going to get her promoted to full professor. I shouldn't preview too much, but I'm just guessing. She's fabulous. But she's one of the people that was kind of stuck at associate. She's doing this really impactful work, but it wasn't work that was being recognized by the university. It's work that's putting WPI on the map. Why wouldn't we want to recognize this work? It's really incredible stuff. And oh, by the way, it has the potential to really change higher education if we can disseminate it effectively. So why wouldn't we want to focus on that? So that's a great example. Through our Center for Project-Based Learning, we have a couple of dozen faculty every summer who mentor and coach the, oh, it's yelling at me. I'm almost done. The teams from different universities. So just to wrap up here on the early results. So we are in our first year, and so I don't really have a lot to report yet, but I did sit with our committee and they let me know that the number of faculty applying for promotion in the first year of these new criteria has doubled. So that's a really good sign to see that people are coming forward. Our promotion criteria used to say, you know, you must be an amazing research person, but of course there's an exception for people who make extraordinary contributions in other ways. So it wasn't that those people were necessarily left out, but it was that they were treated as exceptions. And so they talk about how nice it is to be able to consider their colleagues as people whose work is actually being valued as the core part of these promotion criteria. Some of the faculty I talked with on the committee talked about being worried that what we had done was lower the bar, but now that they see the packages that are coming in and the letters that are coming in to support those, and you have to be really thoughtful about who you ask to write those letters, they see that what we've actually done is really raised the bar here, because we're taking people who otherwise might not have thought it's worth my time to figure out how to disseminate this scholarship effectively, because that's not going to get recognized anyway. And they're actually now thinking much more about how to disseminate it. And that, in many ways, is really raising the bar. Anyway, so we haven't changed our tenure criteria yet, but we're talking about it. And I always think top down and bottom up, support is needed if you're going to make this kind of institutional change. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurie. That was fantastic. I'm really excited to talk more about that too. And our next speaker is Jacqueline Huntoon. Sorry, I'm in the way here. And her co-author, John Gerke from Michigan Technological University.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. Oops. Oh, thank you. Okay, so just a little bit about Michigan Tech. We're in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan in a very rural area, far from most of the metropolitan centers in our state. We're a STEM-dominant university, PhD granting, mid-sized, primarily residential. It's a beautiful place to come and visit in the summer. It's also a beautiful place to come and visit in the winter if you like to ski. So during the past year, we've had a lot of changes at our university. We got a new president. We're going to have a change in our legislature and our governor, and I've spent a lot of time talking to people at the state level about the role of higher education in society. And some of the interesting things that have come out of this are summarized in this data, which is from the New America Foundation. And most people in the United States don't think higher education is fine the way it is. They don't see it serving the greater good the way they would like it to. So although they think that people benefit from having a college education, they see all of us who are involved in higher education as being somewhat insular and not really offering what they, the public, wants from us. And that's a problem for us because for a public institution, we're funded by the public. So there's a lot of good outcomes that come from a college degree, whatever your field. So when there's an economic downturn, the rates of unemployment decrease with education levels. So that's shown in the left-hand side there. And at the same time, the median earnings also increase with educational level, unless you get a PhD. You're better off being a doctor, a lawyer, someone like that, than having a PhD. So that's good for us. And in the state of Michigan, the state's done some studies, and we have great job growth for people who have at least some college. So many more jobs are projected to be available for people who have at least some college as compared to those who don't have any. So that's all great, but there's some huge challenges for us. So Michigan is part of the Rust Belt. During the last economic downturn, a lot of our industries left the state, and enrollment in the public universities is declining. And part of that also is just due to changes in demographics, just fewer 18 to 24-year-olds, the typical college-going age people, but also the percent of senior class members in Michigan who say they want to go to college or are actually enrolling in college is declining. So there's some sense that it's not really worth it to go on to higher education. And that's something that all of the public institutions in Michigan are working together to try to address. So we actually have this marketing campaign going in our state right now. So why are fewer students attending college? Well, part of it's on the front end, the pre-college level, and this is something that I'm not particularly proud of, being a person from Michigan, but the 4th grade reading scores in our state are among the lowest in the nation. So that's not good. The 8th grade mathematics scores, again, among the lowest in the nation. And I recently looked at some data for 8th grade middle school science scores, and out of all of the intermediate school districts in our state, not one had over 50% of the students rated as passing or better. So we're not doing so well on the pre-college end. And one of the things that we did when we realized this, and we want to be more involved in our communities, is we changed our promotion and tenure criteria to explicitly ask people to articulate any activities they've done in support of K through 12 education. So people traditionally would include something like this if they got a grant or if they were involved in some major effort through a professional society or a corporation. But this way, people who even just go and visit a student's classroom or partner with a teacher or serve as a reference for someone can put that into their package. So in Michigan, this lack of talent is starting to be felt by industry, and we were considered for the Amazon headquarters in Detroit. One of the reasons they didn't come was because they said we didn't have enough talent. And businesses are feeling that. So this, I'm sure you can't read what's on the bottom there, but these are the 10 largest US corporations, and the biggest ones are all the E corporations, Apple, Google, Microsoft, et cetera. And then we get into some oil and some of the financial houses. So on the same scale, the next graph, for contrast, is the 10 largest international automakers. And there was recently, probably in October, an article in the Wall Street Journal that talked about the value, not the actual resources, but the market value of some different corporations. And that article rated GM and Ford combined as equal to Uber. And so this article went on to say that the reason Uber has so much value is they're technologically savvy, they're responsive to what customers want, and they're very agile. If they have a problem, they're able to change quickly. And the person who wrote the article suspected that the US automakers have not done that. So one of the things we've done just in the last year is also with our promotion and tenure criteria, explicitly value innovation and commercialization activities. So we're a technological university. We have the highest proportion of our research funded by industry in our state. And in the past, faculty were afraid to report those sorts of activities, like getting patents or doing research for industry, because they thought it wouldn't count or it wouldn't be valued, and it might actually be disvalued or devalued by their peers. So we've put this in there, and we've asked some specific questions about what kind of activities people are engaged in, so that everyone knows that we value this and everyone knows that they should put it into their package. So we're right now in the middle of a series of conversations at the state level and also on our campus about what's going on in our state, what we need to do to really promote economic development and health of the future workforce. And our governor, who's going out at the end of this year, just set aside $60 million for something he called the Michigan Marshall Plan for Talent. And his idea was that we should get corporations, higher education, K through 12, nonprofits, workforce developments, the prison system, everybody to work together to really take the existing talent from where it is now and get it to where it's needed for the workforce. And so there's lots of ideas coming around now through our state about having more opportunities for internships for students, externships for teachers so they can learn more about what's going on in industry, apprenticeship models, and they're pushing us to move to competency-based learning models. And so this, I have a slide on this later, but this is a real challenge for higher ed and even K through 12 to start thinking about, but there's a lot of exciting opportunities here once we figure it all out. So the other thing, the fostering business and education collaboration and creating multiple pathways, the idea is really that throughout a person's career or lifetime, they should have multiple opportunities to either go into education or into the workforce and go back and forth as it's needed. And so in order to make that happen, we need to break our credentials down into smaller and smaller chunks so that somebody can earn a piece of it and then go back to the workforce and then earn the next piece of it. And again, these are really challenging things to think about. My registrar at my university is challenged by all of this, but she's working hard to try to figure out how to make it work. So Laurie, of course, just talked about problem-based learning, and this is one of the things that our state is trying to encourage higher education to do. So I've been involved in a lot of problem-based learning at the K through 12 middle school level, and it's a very effective model there. And of course, on our campus, we have something called the Enterprise, which came out of the engineering college, that also is based on the problem-based learning model. So this is very effective, and what we're finding in today's students is they don't want to just be told you need to learn it because I say it's important or because you're going to need it later. They want to learn it because they're going to use it now, and that's the power of the problem-based learning. So this is about the competency-based model, and most of us have some sort of structure where students take a course that lasts for some specific period of time, and at that end of the course, they get a grade for their participation. And they're graded with 1 grade for all of the course. So whether they got the most important parts or the least important parts, if they got 70% of it overall, great, they get a C and they move on. So in the competency-based model, the concept is that once someone demonstrates mastery of a concept, they move on. And the problem for universities or anyone else is how do you staff this? But if we can figure this out, this could be very powerful. And our state is pushing us to do this because we can then give people credit for having learned something or shown competency with something wherever or whenever they do that. So if they go on an internship, right now we might give them a co-op credit. In the future, we might also be giving them credit for doing something else that relates to their academic program. So these are challenging to think about, but they're exciting because there are some models coming now. So things like badging. A lot of universities use a software called Canvas, and there's a badging module that links directly to that called Badger. And Badger can be used to mark competencies in different fields, which then could be scaled up perhaps to equal the credit for a course or the credit for a certificate and eventually the credit for a degree. And I think if we don't figure this out, a company like Amazon is going to figure this out for us. So it's really behooves us to start working on this as quickly as we can. I think that's it. Yes?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Kim Cobb from Georgia Institute of Technology, and she's going to be speaking about centering public engagement and diversity, equity, and inclusion activities in faculty hiring and promotion, emerging models, and personal reflections. Are you
Yes. So while they pull up the slides, I'm so grateful to be invited to speak to you guys today about something that's very near and dear to my heart, as it is for everybody in this room, I'm sure. And I've been so heartened by the models presented for changing our promotion tenure processes. But I'm not going to focus so much on that, but rather share a little bit about my journey on the ground as a faculty member, and then moving into some focus that I've had in the recent years on faculty hiring, and some thoughts on the public engagement sphere at the very end. My title was very ambitious, so I better get going. Okay, so first I want to start off by thanking my, my incredible lab that's been a daily inspiration to me over the years in reminding me what it is to serve students truly and to center their needs. And so I give them full credit for any progress I've made in this space. So thank you, folks. And let's see the right keyboard. And also big thanks to Twitter, which is also a source of inspiration and you know, some pain and some horror and terror, but mostly progress and learning on Twitter, with an incredible community of SciComm folks, STEM diversity, you see all the hashtags there, and my recent favorite hashtag, #NoFlyAGU, yay! Okay, so moving right along. I spend an inordinate amount of time on diversity, equity, inclusion, and public engagement. So probably about 20 hours a week are devoted to these activities that fall outside the norms of faculty reward structures that, aside from the lovely progressive institutions that we've heard from, Georgia Tech is not one of those that has a formal process for incorporating these into promotion tenure. And so this is really where I started off on this road to where I am today on this podium in some ways. I was just railing against our fight song with some fellow female faculty, and we decided to you know, start a petition. I'm quite fond of petitions, as Eric knows. And you know, we're trying to change one word in this line of this century-old fight song from to cheer the brave and bold to join the brave and bold. One word. You would think the world had ended, honestly, right? So we collected over 1,700 verified Georgia Tech signatures through a web page that my dean let me launch, bless his heart. And then the president was shocked at the community unrest over this fight song. The students launched a counter petition on change.org. The Student Government Association surveyed the entire undergraduate population about campus climate, of gender issues. This was just like the thing, right? I received some horrible vitriolic emails, which would be the first of many to come, of course. And so the president called these listening sessions, and he spent hours and hours and hours and weeks talking to various constituencies, and actually real outcomes came from this petition that was an utter failure, right? And so we never changed this. Nobody's going to change that fight song. Are you kidding me, right? I mean, so these are the outcomes that happened. We had a salary equity study launched and resulted in really incremental and in some cases very large changes to faculty salaries on our campus. We had the advanced professors, which I'll speak about in a minute. They're champions for diversity, equity, inclusion on campus, finally fully endowed to the level of a normal endowed professor. And the students surveyed the climate for women, decided that there were some real problems and we had to do something. And so the president called a gender equity task force, which listed recommendations. You can find them on the Georgia Tech website. So one little tiny conversation in a petition, it was failed, and all this uproar and counter petitions really led to something. That's me being interviewed on the TV station in my first major TV appearance, talking about why cheerleaders are truly important to Georgia Tech's mission. So then I got a call from my dean a couple months later and said, hey, do you want to be an advanced professor? I said, I don't know, but I hear they just got fully endowed, so I'm going to do that. And so we receive, I'm one of 6 on campus, we receive $50,000 per year in discretionary funding, and that enables us to basically have time to devote to the process of championing diversity on our campus, which is a huge structural, multi-layered problem. It's not easy. It takes, as I said, up to 10 hours of my time per week in advocacy work at all levels, from the president all the way down to my peers and even graduate students and postdocs. And this is renewable on a 3-year term, and we chew on this together. They're all otherwise fully endowed professors, and they have this additional mandate and this additional privilege to work at this role. So I think this is a really advanced model. I'm not aware of many institutions that have really put this level of resourcing into this role specifically, and I think it's really pretty forward-looking. And it's certainly been wonderful to work at. One of the pieces we've been focused on is hiring. And this is a relatively complicated plot, but it just shows you the number of people walking onto our campus every year since 2001, I think, I'm not sure. 2003, and falling into different demographic groups. And so the big purple bars are non-URM men, and the green bars are non-URM women, and the blue bars are URM. I think there's 2 categories, URM men in red and URM women in blue. And so you can see, if you kind of step back at this, we haven't really made much progress on our campus from kind of epoch to epoch, if you will. And we certainly seem to have maybe even lost some ground with some of the URM hiring over the course of this decade. So wow, we may be changing the campus constituency a little bit, because the people who are leaving through retirement are more men, but this is going to take a really long time if we're hoping to achieve any kind of meaningful shift in these demographics, and we supposedly have policies in place to hire diverse faculty. And so I don't want to harp on this recent lovely article in Nature Geo by a couple women who decided to look at the race and ethnicity of recent PhDs. And so this is basically showing you that for the URM categories especially, we've just made very little progress, if any, over the last decades. And so we really have some issues here on the pipeline side, although I hate that word. On the male-female side, we're doing a little bit better in terms of, this is earth sciences, not all sciences, but this is showing you that we have closed some gaps. Earth sciences is a little better than atmospheric sciences, but so we have some folks out there who could potentially step into these roles, but they're not making it. The other issue is that we see of course, this is the graduate student population at Georgia Tech across sciences, engineering, and computing, as advised by male advisors on the left and female advisors on the right. This is a study that we did as advanced professors. And our conclusion from this was something that we knew intuitively, which is that women faculty are advising a larger proportion of female and URM graduate students on our campuses. So this is important because this is a kind of a feedback loop of, you increase the diversity of the faculty, you increase the diversity for graduate students, and you increase the climate for success for all constituencies on campus in these categories. There's a reason why they're gravitating towards those people, because they provide a more amenable culture and environment for them. So you could reward diversity through this by increasing the number of fellowships to white women and people of color as graduate students, so that you could actually start to move this needle and recognize the value that is that these people are playing in your community as a set.
So that's something we're looking at Georgia Tech, trying to fundraise for that explicitly, one of our data-driven recommendations from Advance. And so this faculty search process is something that we have looked very closely at, and we've recognized that there's explicit bias, structural bias, and implicit bias in all faculty searches. If you take that as a foundational principle, which is a big if on many campuses, but it actually is true and there's data to prove it out there, let's just say that you get rid of explicit bias if you're really lucky, so you're left with structural and implicit, then you still hear these things being said after searches. We ran an unbiased search. We really care about diversity, but excellence is our top priority. And you hear these things again and again and again on our campuses, and these are huge red flags, and we hear this at Georgia Tech. I'm not saying we don't. Huge red flags that we have so much work to do in raising awareness about bias in searches and the fact that it's absolutely inescapable. And so we have a process going forward right now. We have a living document that's being iterated on. This is a whole list of some of our strongest recommendations. This is our little rubric to remind people that diversity, excellence, and equity go together. They're actually overlapping circles. You really can't have one without the other. This is really critically important for our faculty to understand. So we've mandated implicit bias training. We're including diversity statement, diversity as a criteria for the search, mandating that you meet the professional benchmark for those recent PhDs in your search. So for AGU, that's roughly 40% female in that PhD cohort for some of our sciences. Have a diverse shortlist. That's the most contentious one. What does that mean? And then use a rubric with quantitative assessments. And this most notably on the bottom here, revolutionary concept of including uncertainty in the final ranking. We all know as scientists that you cannot make any measurement without some metric of uncertainty attached to that, right? We see that at the halls of AGU every year. And so why do we present rankings that are 1, 2, 3 as if there's no uncertainty bars attached to those final rankings that are coming into recommendation for a hiring? So this is one suggestion of recognizing how you could reflect uncertainty and structural bias in a graphic here. So you have a quality score. This could be informed by your quantitative metric from your rubric, right? You have a whole search committee that has drafted these up and filled in these rubrics, and you've averaged them together. And here I'm pointing out that you can reflect structural biases in asymmetric uncertainty bars that may make these candidates really overlapping and indistinguishable, therefore allowing one to proactively move to hire that diverse candidate, even if they are, quote, ranked second, which is so often the outcome, recognizing that we can never escape the multi-layers of bias. And so what we're trying to do here is move towards these graduate diversity fellowship. That takes money, rotating diversity professorships to recognize those professors on campus who are diversity champions. These would be rotating 3-year positions. And perhaps remove service requirements for white women and people of color who are engaged in promoting diversity. And then let them choose their assignments on campus, right? They're your workhorses. They're your champions. They really need to be rewarded. And so we need to move way beyond incrementalism. And so what we're envisioning at Georgia Tech is infusing diversity reporting all the way up the chain through your annual reports, all the way up to the provost, and then accountability down the other side. So are you hitting your goal? What are your goals? Are you hitting those goals? It cannot be outsourced to 6 advanced professors or a couple passionate female faculty who start a crazy petition. This has to be incorporated at every level of the hierarchy. And so because one systemic isn't enough, I wanted to spend a quick moment talking about public engagement, which is another one of my core passions. More difficult to think about, but central to our mission, not just as academicians, but also as earth scientists in a day when we have the emergence of these alternative fact realities and post-truth world. And this is marking my kind of entry into this foray with a loud bang at the Stand Up for Science rally 2 years ago here at AGU, when I said that we need to rethink our approach to public engagement as scientists, and we cannot outsource that either to the media. And this is me not outsourcing that to the media, being really afraid on live television. And so these are some thoughts on how we could move the needle on public engagement within the culture and process of academia. There are some institutions that have institutional awards for public engagement that would have money attached, just like for research and teaching.
You would have public engagement fellows that could be funded at your institution. You could have public engagement professorships that would sit at the same level as research professorships or endowed professorships to recognize people's huge amount of years that go into this. You could also remove service and or teaching requirements for your most highly engaged faculty. Again, this is 10 hours of my time a week. And you could really create a culture of this public engagement through working with students and postdocs to raise that training for them. They want it. We should be delivering it. And lastly, I just want to thank all of the tweeps out there and my lovely Twitter community who has taught me so much about diversity in science communication over the years. And anything that I've said today that has any resonance or use is really all because of them. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kim. And our next speaker is Sarah Fortner from Wittenberg University. Thank you.
PC or Mac? It was PC. Oh. Sorry, I need to do it. Oh, you're fine. Sorry.
So thank you very much for having me to this session. I'm really glad to be in a session that really is thinking about ways that we can better value our work in communities and the work we do with the public in general. When I think about this work, I think a little bit about my own career. When I was a postdoc at the North Appalachian Experimental Watershed, this watershed is one of 2 places in the U.S. that is monitoring groundwater and surface water from small agricultural watersheds. And when I was a postdoc, we were trying to get funding to continue research at this site, and the funding was cut, the station closed down, and 40 years of data was then discontinued. And there's only one other site that's doing this work, and you think about that, what would it mean to have data on those agricultural watersheds now? Now that we're going through this major climate transition and we have all these questions that are so important to society. Why was the station cut down? It's clearly important to society. But maybe it wasn't valuable. Why wasn't it? And so then I think about my own community and what they think about when they think about science. And when we think about science, we think about our local reservoir, which faces toxic algae blooms, frequently in the warm part of the summer. And this is becoming more common in Ohio. And this is an equity issue because kids that swim here lose their swimming hole, and this is the only free place they can go. So thinking about where the geosciences may fit within society, I look at also how do other people see the geosciences? Where do we fit within the broader societal picture? And mayors identify energy and the environment as important, but it's not as important as issues like economic development, infrastructure, budget and management. Those things are at the forefront of conversations. So really, if we want to do a job of connecting with societal conversations, we must connect to these conversations. And we must think also about how energy and the environment are also placed with demographic issues. So those are issues of equity and justice. So those also are not at the forefront of conversation. So if we truly want to move this work forward, we should think about how to move things forward as a system. How do we bring problem solving of earth issues and equity issues into the community sphere? This conversation is also one that we must think about if we want to think about student outcomes and workforce outcomes. So much like Kim said, the diversity of our discipline and employment has not shifted. And so when I think about what can I do in my curriculum or in my program or institution, there needs to be a shift to valuing outcomes for our students and for the community. So what practices do this? Thinking about how do we provide information and communication in ways that are aligned with community needs and priorities. Thinking about engagement that empowers our students and the community. What's going to make them people who have not been in our discipline feel like they can use science. The community members who have not previously used or thought of this issue as science use science. And I think this work requires building, creating new connections on behalf of our students and communities, and finding and joining existing networks of progress. So if there are people who are working on empowering citizens, how do you join in that conversation and bring geoscience into it? And this also means confronting the structural barriers and inequities that we face, and these are also part of our tenure and promotion process. So the question is, do our current practices and policies line up? So I did a survey with Carolyn Wilson of geoscience faculty on their practices in the community. There were 263 participants in this survey from most of the states and all institutional settings. There was a good representation of fields represented, but not diversity. And what we found was that institutional policies really matter. In fact, there was a significant difference in whether or not a program used societally relevant learning goals. So I value the geosciences and teaching it in a societally relevant context. And also whether programs were including information or digital literacy in intro courses, or whether programs required some sort of public engagement training for their graduates. So it's significant. And it's also, I think you can look at these individually and say, okay, so 75% of faculty are teaching societally relevant learning goals. That's great. Wow, 40%, only 40% teach information literacy when science, one of the primary barriers to science is translating it into a public forum. I keep wanting to push the wrong one. Another thing is looking at how the scales of issues are taught in geoscience programs. We do a really good job of teaching issues at global scales. This may be our research orientation showing up in our classrooms. Thinking about my work is globally important and maybe not taking the time to translate it to local or scales of use for people in your community. So you can see differences here in this between faculty that come from institutions that value tenure, value engagement, and those that do not. National, regional, state, and local issues are taught more frequently when there is a value for public engagement. But I'll point out that less than half of all faculty are teaching issues at local scales. And we think about this as, what work are our students going on to do? I mean, if you're not an academic, you are working in a community. And then another result from the survey that is important to point out is that even how we teach in the classroom and whether or not we're incorporating different perspectives into our classroom depends on who we are, on our composition. Women and non-gender reporting faculty, or people who did not report their gender, I should say, were more likely to include perspectives from underrepresented or marginalized people within their group or classroom. So within faculty-reported teaching practices that relate to civic and science literacy outcomes, most of our work is thinking about how geoscience issues impact people and what scale we're doing that at is global scales, not local ones. We're also doing a little bit of work making connections between policies and science issues, but a lot of our work is not done on having students reflect on their roles or thinking about how students might use science as an advocate. And I think this is important because college students as a whole, when they graduate, less than 20% report that they have discussed local issues on a regular basis. That is, thinking about that you're not talking about a local issue, you're not seeing science in that context, we're not reinforcing it in our class, but we could. This is a great opportunity for us. And I would say that a lot of our engagement activities relate a lot to academic culture. We're more likely, and I want to also point out that I think these percentages are high. I think people who would respond to a survey on civic engagement is a high, these numbers are higher than probably our discipline as a whole, right? So what you might look at this is for relative participation, and looking at that, we're more likely to collaborate with scientists from other disciplines. That makes sense. And then I think the activities like working with the K through 12 sphere or public issues and just sharing your science in relatable ways, I think that fits our academic culture, or we're starting to shift in that direction. You see more support for public engagement, at least in the sharing sense. But what we don't see is as much work that requires learning a new culture. So how do I go in and join my local board and talk about science within your conversation and think about your priorities and then tweak my message so that it fits within the agenda that the local group has. And I think that's the work, you can see that that's kind of the work that we're doing less of. Anything that would relate to crossing boundaries or policies. So the primary results of the survey suggest that program and institutional practices directly relate to what we do on our campuses and whether or not we support science literacy. I think teaching at local issues is a promising practice that we could all consider implementing, because when you're teaching at local levels, you are having to cross into different cultures. You think about, if I want to install a local food garden and study the soil conditions on it, and there's a barrier, a code ordinance that doesn't allow water to go on the site, you're immediately engaging your students in a real-world challenge that prevents the solution that you've identified that may be very scholarly from actually happening, because there's a context that's preventing that work from happening. So local work is a good way to engage yourself and students in context. And our composition, who we are, I was only able to look at gender. There was not enough diversity of respondents to look at race or other factors. But clearly, just from the gender example, who we are does impact our teaching and our engagement choices. And what we prefer and how we choose things should be considered when we're identifying what is valued. And finally, academics, we favor styles of engagement that relate to our culture, but we should consider making a shift and favoring some other styles of engagement if we truly want to reach into and help and work with communities. So I suggest that we should design policies and curriculum on behalf of student and community outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And now I'm my honor to introduce Lisa Graumlich, who's also on AGU's board.
And this is my keyboard. Great. Here we go. It's Monday morning, the first morning of AGU's fall meeting. 26,000 of our colleagues are here, not in this room, but available virtually, to think about our purpose, which is to promote discovery in the earth and space sciences for the benefit of humanity. And so the people that are in this room here or virtually, I'm very proud of us, because we are the people that are sort of thinking through how we actually operationalize that for the benefit of humanity, and appreciate all the speakers that have gone before me with very interesting ideas about this. As dean of a very large college of the environment, this is a frontline issue for me. So some good news here. The public expects investments in science will yield solutions to environmental issues. And the even better news here is that our colleagues, particularly our early career scientists, see this as an issue in which they are very keen to engage. Our less good news, and we've seen evidence of that in the reporting here, is that we've got entrenched and outdated incentives for evaluating public engagement. We have often heard that people that do this kind of work, particularly in early career, hide it. You know, this is not something that they want to bring forward. So what I want to do today, what this looks like is that public engagement is laudable service, and just make sure that you do it after your real work is done. So as leaders in this field, we ignore these trends towards wanting society to see science as more relevant, and yet keeping it off into a kind of activity that we do late at night after our real work is done is not something that we ignore those trends at our peril. So let's actually think about how we do this work for the benefit of humanity, and think about how did we end up in this situation, where are we right now, and how do we move forward. So in thinking about how we get here, there is a notion that robust, credible science needs a gatekeeper, and it is these various merit evaluations and promotion and tenure that act as a gatekeeper, and it tells us what kind of science gets done and what kind of science gets valued. This is a big deal. Now, there is an opportunity here, because at the level of a dean that exists in a working with a faculty code, typically the faculty codes are really vague. I write these letters about who gets tenure and who gets promoted and not, and it has to do with whether the scholar has achieved or has the promise to achieve national recognition as a leader in the field. And I think we need to march right into that leadership conversation, because I think that's actually where we've got the opportunity to bend and stretch and enlarge this conversation. We can evolve. Most of you in this room weren't born or were very young when I went up for tenure. I was told I would not get tenure unless I had a single authored publication. So in 1987, I wrote this incredibly memorable paper, Precipitation Variation in the Pacific Northwest as Reconstructed from Tree Rings. Notice I am the only person on that. Notice that it's very geographically limited, it's temporally limited. It is actually the paper of mine that has had the least number of citations. So as we have evolved, thank goodness, as a more collaborative scientific community, we have changed the way we view leadership. And I think most of our promotion and tenure committees would not be particularly excited about a paper like that. So as we value public engagement, national recognition, I would say, has to evolve beyond this kind of publication checklist mentality. So where are we now? I would say we are squarely in the crosshairs of a situation where we are balancing risk and reward, particularly for our early career scientists. Okay. Bear with me in thinking about how public engagement is one of the faces of interdisciplinary scholarship and what interdisciplinary scholarship actually looks like in terms of risk and reward. These are data that come from a University of California, Berkeley professor in the engineering department that looked at 17,000 patents in terms of their value. Okay, I've got this. The value of the innovation, which he could do in terms of monetary value, and the interdisciplinarity of the team. And this is kind of interesting, that the initially sort of the the more interdisciplinary the team, the lower the value. So there's kind of a signal there. But what's really striking to me about this graph is that what we really want to know is, how do we get to these breakthrough innovations? And this is where we want to and need to be in our science, and it comes without trivial risk. It's important to actually think about what that means. So let's actually put a face on that. Here's one of my faculty members. Gordon Holtgreave came to us as an assistant professor because he was really good at looking at food webs of freshwater fisheries and the biogeochemical implications of that. We were very excited to hire him. He got an initial grant to work in the Mekong River Delta, which, if you haven't thought about fish, is a very exciting place to be. It's the world's largest freshwater fishery. There's over 300 species there. And he started his work there, and he's a really good guy. So he presented his work in front of the Mekong River Commission, because surely they would care about the biogeochemical implications of 300 fish in their fisheries. As he describes it, he got chewed out. He got really chewed out because the people in the Mekong River Commission wanted to know, they didn't really care about the biogeochemicals here. What they cared about was that there's currently a proposal to put 100 dams in that 2,000-kilometer stretch of river because of the power needs, the renewable energy needs for the 6 countries and 60 million people that depend on that river. And Gordon came away wondering, how is it that we actually think about the health and viability of these fisheries, which feed these people, in the context of dam construction? He switched gears, and one could argue that he switched gears, and it was a home run. Here's a year ago, a paper in Science that he publishes along with a set of colleagues that looks at the way in which you can actually optimize the operation of dams to increase or maintain fishery production as well as rice irrigation, and can find a sort of middle route through here. How did he do it? One could say he was a really smart guy that worked extra hard. And he is a really smart guy, and he really did work extra hard. But he did this in an institutional context. He came to us, and we realized this was the dean, the College of the Environment, the University of Washington. This was an incredible opportunity, and that he actually had a startup package as an assistant professor that was all about, remember those 300 fish and biogeochemistry and really nice mass specs. And what he really needed to do was to have additional startup support that would allow him to make the transition to this work. In addition, he needed different kinds of scientific and scholarly expertise. He started affiliations with our engineers locally at the University of Washington and our civil and environmental engineering. Those are people that solve problems. He also started collaborations with people at Arizona State University, where you can actually be a professor of sustainability science, where local impact and global impact actually comes together in the practice of what you do. We also helped him connect with private funding sources. We were able to actually devote significant amount of time in our development work to actually find private funders that would fund this, because this was not something that the National Science Foundation was going to fund. So we have people that are our role models in doing this. And we have ways that we have talked about this as an individual activity. And we have AGU sharing science way that we talk about building individual capacity. We have Pew Fellows. We have AAAS Community and Engagement Fellows. We have the Leopold Program. We have all these programs that invest in individuals as the heroes of this story. And the point I want to make is that it's a collective problem. What we need to do is figure out ways that we as individuals, particularly early career individuals, are supported by boundary and backbone organizations that allow that individual impact to be scaled. I have a couple of favorites. the University of Washington launched in the last year the Earth Lab, which looks at ways in which we can take on very gnarly, wicked problems with interdisciplinary teams to have impact. We are very excited at AGU to see the Thriving Earth Exchange coming fully into its own as one more backbone organization that allows the activity of individuals to be greatly, greatly magnified. So, in conclusion, our emerging leaders need to be able to have honest conversations about the trade-offs, and we need fearless leadership in changing these reward systems. Who in this room has tenure? Okay, all of you, you are working with myself as sort of deans and other leaders to ensure that this culture changes, because without it, we won't be able to continue to pursue our mission. Thank you.
So thank you to all the speakers for their wonderful presentations. We now have half an hour for questions and discussion. So if there are questions you might have for particular speakers, please do come up to the microphone and ask those questions. And because I know no one's going to get up, I actually have a question for Sarah Fortner in the meantime. So you'll have to also make it either to the podium to answer, or you can come up here. So, you know, you were talking about your work. Now, was that part of your, was that recognized when you went up for tenure?
Okay. So, we're primarily evaluated on our teaching at Wittenberg using a standard form that doesn't actually line up with student outcomes that relate to my class. And so I did a lot of assessment, found alternative ways to show success. In particular, an example from my class this semester, I asked my students, how many of you can name a local climate impact? And only 20% could. And at the end of the semester, they all could. And they had all shifted their attitude toward a more pro-community engagement and pro working on solutions attitude. So 25% increase in interest in actually doing things that relate to science literacy. So I found the assessments needed to align with what my community values, which is teaching. And then I maintained some of the networks that I have in the research realm to continue doing glacier work and things like that. Thanks.
So I have a question for all of the panelists. I think several people touched on the idea of diversity and how promoting diversity is important for the academy. In my state, my home state, one of the things that's happening now is we're starting to have conversations about promoting diversity, which means recruiting more white males. And I'm wondering if that's just in my state or if anyone else is having those sorts of conversations. That there's some of the universities in our state are having real challenges recruiting young men to come to the undergraduate programs.
So we're inviting our speakers to the podium. So maybe you can take a turn to answer, or you can be seated.
We're like I know, I'm trying to think of like somebody that answers no. Yeah.
Valuing diversity, I think
Well, I'd like to give a quick response to that. I think, of course, in our field in environmental science, we've made a lot of progress in gender diversity overall, especially among the students, but I don't think it's been so much progress that there's a concern about not having enough white males at the faculty level or the upper faculty level. I did note, I thought it was kind of interesting that when we were putting together this panel, it was important to recruit one male to be involved in the panel. And I think that speaks volumes to who's interested in this topic. And I think it's not only counting people and which column they tick in terms of the gender, but who's actually getting involved as well. And I don't think we're going to solve these problems, and it's not a matter of how many white males or any other affiliation are there and counted. That's important, but who's really engaged? And I think I've made this point in workshops on sexual harassment, and look out in the audience and see that it's 85% female, and say, you know, we're not going to solve this problem until I look out in the audience and see that there's at least 30 or 40% male out there, because they're the ones that have to change the culture, right?
I have a related response. We're having a race conversation on our campus right now, and one of the things I thought about doing was looking at our institutional engagement data, the NSSE, and a lot of, I don't remember what the acronym stands for.
National Survey of Student Engagement.
Yeah, well, so there, I'm pretty close, I just forgot. So looking at that data, and there is actually, it shows within your freshman and your senior graduating class how students respond on a various engagement activities, including the inclusion of diverse perspectives in the classroom. And as we were having this race conversation, I said, listen, this is where we are below the benchmark, right? And so showing some of the data when conversations come up, and finding that and saying, this is an opportunity for faculty development. This is the conversation that can happen within our hiring structures, and pointing people to resources. A lot of times our conversations on campus are very negative, and I suggest anytime those things come up to think of proactive literature-based things to suggest.
So, okay, so, is this on? So we talked a little bit about some of the things that science societies are doing, and Vicki kind of started our conversation with that. Lisa and I have had many conversations about what more can societies like GSA and AGU and AGI and AMS be doing to kind of promote good practices within our broader community. What can we do to kind of showcase the behavior of some of the universities, since it's not universal. So I'm just curious what our speakers think about what we can do. We talked a little bit about awards and honors. AGU has a couple that are in that realm as well, or Ambassador Award or Climate Communications Award. But what more can we do?
So, okay. So my view is that sort of having some awards that are inflammatorily, I'll say, separate but equal, is not the right answer. I think that if we're going to really broaden the definition of scholarly impact, or of impact by scholars, and celebrating it, we really have to think about those things like fellows, like those core medals and awards, and thinking about how it is that they are going to honor these kind of contributions. That's what really moving the needle looks like to me. In addition to, of course, obviously there's awards that are pretty narrowly scoped, and so if you can have the sort of highest level of honors be inclusive of different types of work, I think that is important. But you know, promotion tenure committees, they look at that stuff. They look at external honors. That's really important. And so if those kind of things can be included explicitly, and then enforced, if you will, through that process, it would make a huge difference, and it would start to cause universities to start to change the way they do things if the societies really and truly honored these sorts of contributions, I think. And by the way, funding agencies would be another one where this would be super helpful.
And I just wanted to add something to that. It's actually a call to the community that if you want us to be able to have those nominations to consider, nominate, make the argument, sure, make a strong argument, give us an opportunity to have those criteria to consider, because it really is a two-way street.
Yeah. And the other thing I would say is I just want to point to Raj, who's here from the Thriving Earth Exchange. I'm hoping maybe we could have a little chat about techs at AGU as being really one of the most exciting mechanisms through our professional society here to be able to channel some of this work focused on public engagement and impact. It's meant to provide a platform for AGU scientists to do that. And yet, I'm just guessing, and Raj, I would like to hear from you now after several years of experience with this. So many scientists, our hypothesis going in, and we worked hand in hand in founding this thing a few years ago, was that a lot of our scientists in our community really wanted to find an outlet to be able to do more sort of locally impactful work, but maybe didn't have the contacts or didn't have, kind of, it was so different from their day-to-day research that they might not be well positioned to be able to do it. And techs can provide that opportunity. But I wonder how much we are really running into this concern about, but I'm not really rewarded for that kind of work, and therefore it's a barrier to me considering spending time on that. He's nodding. Do you want to say anything about it? I mean, I think, again, it's a symptom of the challenge.
You have to come up here or go over there.
Sorry, Raj, I put you on the spot. I got to put a text ad out there whenever I can.
Yes.
Ignored.
So the way what we've done is we've positioned techs as a volunteer opportunity, and that's for a couple of reasons. But one of them is because of this barrier. Another is because it allows us to really focus on that intersection of scientific expertise and community priority. And what we found is that when institutional pressures get in the way or are overlaid on that, they can sometimes tweak the path away from community priority.
Right.
And the last reason it's volunteer, honestly, is because it creates a kind of parity in decision process that doesn't happen when one person's coming with an institution and a $50,000 budget, and another person's coming from a grassroots organization that's meeting in the back of a fabric store on mismatched chairs. So.
Yeah, interesting.
So I'd like to add something to that. 2 points. Again, making the analogy to the issue of harassment and bullying. So Title IX was transformational. It was imposed upon U.S. institutions by the U.S. government. But those institutions, particularly academic institutions, over the years learned to work with it or work around it, depending on whatever their perspective was. To expect to go the next level, I don't think you would expect those institutions to lead it, because what does an HR department do when they write their regulations? They're writing it to protect the institution, right? And I think the same applies here, in that if you're expecting a top-down approach at the university to change the culture, there may be some exceptions, like probably the University of Washington, where there are some people who, at least a few people, who have that perspective and are going to move it forward. But the vast majority are academia set up to maintain the status quo and to keep going. So you ask what's the role of scientific societies. It's the voice from outside of those institutions that are designed to maintain themselves, to push the envelope and say, there's another way of doing this. And we can do that at lots of different levels, trying to educate heads and chairs. We can do it through these kinds of events and next time try to get the room full. Another thing we can do is that a lot of the feedback I get from our early career, tenure track faculty is, it's not the older faculty, the curmudgeons that you might think that are opposed to this. There are a few of those, but there are a lot of younger faculty who are kind of afraid because it is sort of vague. And there aren't, in a way, some of them might feel more comfortable going up for tenure if they really knew what the quantitative evaluation was going to be. So now what we could do as scholars is to help give them the tools, and I like the point somebody made about, I think it was Lisa, but I'm not sure, about taking what's already there in terms of the sort of the vague statement about advancing scholarship, so that we don't have to change the rules at the universities, but fill in the definitions of what scholarship means and provide some quantitative, semi-quantitative approaches to it, so that that enables those early career faculty members who are going up for tenure, also the people who are going to serve on those committees, to actually have some tools to work within the existing system. And then eventually, hopefully, the existing system will evolve as well, and we might be able to change culture in terms of actually having more institutions adopt the Boyer method or some other method. But in the meantime, scientific societies like AGU can help provide the tools for and be that outside push to get things moving, for which there isn't a push from the inside, except for a few faculty members who are not as courageous as, not everybody can be as courageous as Kim, and who feel that they can't really make waves. So I'll stop there. I think you wanted.
So I also want to think about a role that the professional societies can play that once again goes beyond sort of rewarding heroic individuals. So if you actually think about what techs might look like in 5 years from now, is that we start to see an accumulation and a deeper understanding of what community needs broadly defined are in terms of their sort of relationship to a scientific community like AGU, and can we actually see a elevation of the kinds of concerns and scientific needs of community members as being the stuff of the prestigious union sessions, et cetera. So it's, once again, I think we need to find ways that this isn't not just the heroic, brave individual that then somehow busts out and gets the award, but that this kind of work is actually elevated by the scientific society.
I wanted to say one more reminder about the role for professional societies in their context of journal repositories and leadership and a whole structure upon which the foundation of science rests. And here at AGU, of course, many of our most esteemed journals rest underneath its umbrella. And I just stepped off the editorial board of Geophysical Research Letters, where I served for 3 years. And during that time, the editorial board went from 15% women to 60% women. There are still, I think, 5 or 6 AGU journals that have no women on the editorial board. There are, of the 19 journals, I think there are 2 or 3 that have, maybe you can correct me, an editor-in-chief who is a woman. Has that number improved since last year? Okay, well, last year it was 2 out of 19 journals. And so this is another very important mechanism by which AGU can help to lift up these issues and provide systemic change. So that's something that could change very quickly. And Geophysical Research Letters changed so quickly because we had a very proactive editor-in-chief in Noah Diffenbach, who has since stepped down. So this goes, to something that we could all think about in pushing the AGU leadership and the journals themselves to be more proactive in thinking about how to promote women onto those leadership positions, because as a trickle-down effect onto the people who's reviewing our papers, who's submitting papers, and ultimately then who is publishing papers. So it's not just a leadership position of a single brave person on an editorial board. It actually has a huge trickle-down effect systemically.
Okay, thanks for the session. Really appreciated all the talks. I want to ask a question that I guess I'm going to frame it in terms of the public engagement side, although I think one could probably ask it just as well about the diversity inclusion side, but I can't think about both at once. Just as full disclosure in a few seconds, I had a sort of regular scientific career with almost no public engagement up to about mid-career, when suddenly geophysical event caused me to suddenly have more opportunities, and I started doing a lot of public engagement for a few years. It was, I think, sort of informally appreciated by my institution, which resulted in me actually having a much increased service load because I got asked to be on lots of committees because people thought I was a visible person. But that's not what I want to ask about. That's just so you know where I'm coming from. I guess the question is, I think the sentiment in these presentations, which I completely support and agree with, is that we should get the institutions to recognize these activities more. And any advice about how to do that in our own institutions, I'd appreciate. But if we think sort of a step ahead and imagine that it really started to happen and happen more, wouldn't we then be faced with some new questions about how to evaluate whether any individual person is doing it well? In other words, for traditional scholarship, we sort of know that you have peer review, you get letters, you have all those things, and we may have flawed metric. We may think the H-index or whatever is bad, but at least we have some system that we sort of know how it works and what its pros and cons are. When it comes to public engagement, I think we're at a point now where we're saying, well, some people are doing it a lot, and just any kind of recognition would be better than what we have now, which is 0. So, okay, that's fine. But if we imagine we get past 0, do we not have a question about how to evaluate whether it's being done well or badly? And for those who are deans and university presidents or anyone else who's involved, I'd just love to hear any thoughts on that. Thank you.
So I think that's another place where professional societies could really play a role, because they have the opportunity to do recognition of members who are doing things that are impactful. And I think in my outside of geoscience life, I've had the opportunity to participate in some workshops led by people like Alan Alda, for example, about how to talk about your science or about tricky issues to a general public that may not be sympathetic or supportive of what you have to say. And I think that's another way the societies could help, because many of us, when we come up through the educational system, we can talk really well by the time we get our PhD to undergraduate students, because we've been TAs, and to our peers who also have PhDs. But if we're trying to talk to the public or our family members, we're not really prepared to do that as well as we could be. And I think it could really help the geosciences a lot, particularly in this day and age.
Go ahead.
May I comment on your question and also comment on a point that Eric made? But first, I'm John Geisman. I'm past GSA president. I've been a department chair. I'm currently a department head. I'm editor-in-chief of Tectonics. Oh, by the way, 67% of our editors on Tectonics are women. And let's see, I'm chair of the AGU Fellow Selection Committee. There is something I think that is very, very simple that professional societies can do. And that is that anyone who receives an award, and in particular for an award that has a connotation in terms of public service, outreach, et cetera, a letter goes to the dean, to the provost, and the president from the president of that society, emphasizing that this has taken place, and here is why this is important. It has a tremendous impact. When GSA several years ago came out with their policy statement on the importance of geoscience education in higher education, every single dean, every single provost, every single president at major institutions in the United States received a hand-signed letter, yours truly, with that statement in the communication. It was profoundly effective. So those are my 2 cents.
Go ahead, quickly ask your question. We have 1 minute left in this session.
Okay, quick question. So I appreciate that this session is focused on faculty, but maybe Lisa, quick comment on your vision for bold leadership for those of us who have had our dream jobs not be in faculty line, but we're research scientists at universities doing boundary spanning work and choosing careers based in public engagement and community-centered science.
Quick answer. When I made a call out to collective impact from boundary organization and backbone organizations, the backbone of the backbone organizations is quite often research scientists, professional communicators, and people for whom there is expertise and vast amount of talent in making those connections between communities and scientists. It is important work, it's sophisticated work, it's nuanced work, and we need more people being funded, real resources going into that interface, because without that connective tissue, we're all just kind of these bumbling, nerdy scientists trying to figure out what the heck we're doing. Thank you for what you do.
Right. Unfortunately, this session has come to an end. Thank you for your attendance. If you have questions for the speakers, please continue your conversations in the hallway. And again, thank you. This is the first step in our conversation about this very important topic. Thank you.